My name is Karen. I'm 22 years old and I've been through things I never thought I'd experience at such a young age. People can sometimes be very cruel and don't care about hurting others, as long as it brings a malicious smile to their face when they see the suffering of others. About a year and a half ago, I met a girl named Stacy through social media. It turned out we were from the same city and we soon started texting quite often. Honestly, we hit it off right away, and before we knew it, we got along very well. We even arranged to meet up for a few beers, and that's exactly what we did. Stacy was 2 years older than me, and from the beginning, I felt like I could trust her a lot because we told each other very personal things and shared similar preferences. She often came to my house, and I did the same at hers. At that time, I was renting a small apartment that I had worked hard for. This further increased our trust. We became close friends, even lent each other clothes, shared secrets, and grew even closer. The relationship was so good that I thought nothing could destroy what we had built. But as is often the case in such stories, this friendship had a dark side. It began one afternoon when we went to eat at a downtown restaurant. As we walked, I noticed a man who kept looking at us. He was attractive, athletic, with a charming smile. Stacy saw him too. She jokingly started flirting with him. At some point, he came closer, but not to talk to her. He came directly to me. It was super awkward. He approached me and handed me his number. Meanwhile, Stacy looked annoyed. You could see it on her face, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. The man, his name was Ryan, only left after he had put his number in my palm. We said goodbye, and as we left the restaurant, Stacy was silent for a while and seemed offended. I asked what was wrong, and finally she confessed that she had liked this man for a long time, but was jealous because he had given me attention. The argument was inevitable. She accused me of taking the number and of even going to that place, which she had only visited to see Ryan. I tried to explain that it wasn't my intention, but angrily, she demanded that I give her the phone and his contact details. And because I didn't want to make things worse, I gave it to her. She promised she would get in touch and we would go out together again soon, but what followed was even stranger. A few days later, Stacy called and said she had spoken to Ryan and he had rejected her, not because of her, but because he actually wanted to go out with me, not her. That's when everything got complicated. Stacy became jealous and started to complain. She said she had gone there specifically for him, and I had no idea about the whole story. The truth was, it wasn't my fault, but she didn't want to understand that. We argued fiercely and finally said we never wanted to see each other again. What remained was a bitter taste, because deep down I knew that it wasn't my fault that he hadn't paid her any attention. And besides, she had taken me with her just to meet Ryan. Our friendship, which seemed so strong, collapsed within a few days as if nothing had happened. 2 weeks passed and honestly, I missed Stacy a lot. I had grown fond of the girl, going out with her and laughing about nonsense. But the way it ended seemed absurd and childish to me. I thought maybe, just maybe, things would work out and we could be friends again, until that first night when everything changed. It was a perfectly normal night. I was sleeping soundly in my apartment when suddenly something woke me up in the middle of the night. A knocking right by my ear, something that sounded like a whisper or a very strange noise. I opened my eyes, jumped out of bed, my heart pounding, and turned on the light. I thought it might just have been a strange dream, but just as I was about to turn off the lamp again, I heard noises in the kitchen, as if someone was moving around in there. Carefully, I got up and slowly, fearfully walked towards the door. But when I turned on the light, no one was there. Very strange. I dismissed it as imagination or nervousness, turned off the light, and turned to go back to sleep. It wasn't that simple. The TV in my room turned on by itself. I nearly had a heart attack. Startled, I jumped up and looked for the remote control, which was on the sofa, which I found very strange, because the TV was clearly on my bedside table. After that, everything got stranger and stranger. I tried to sleep, but it was impossible. All night long I had nightmares, dreams in which my teeth fell out and I saw crystal clear water flowing in huge rivers and endless waterfalls. The next morning when I went to work, I felt worse than ever, as if someone had sucked all the energy out of me. I had no strength left, a severe headache, and felt constantly dizzy. A colleague noticed how pale I looked and said, "It's better if you go home and rest." So I asked for permission and drove home, but even pills couldn't alleviate the discomfort that swept over me. I felt watched and heard strange noises in every corner of the apartment. The night was particularly bad. Late at night, almost at dawn, sleep was out of the question. When I came out of the bathroom, I heard noises in the kitchen again, as if someone was standing there in the dark. As I got closer, I saw a shadow, a figure standing there, but I couldn't make out more than a silhouette. My TV turned on by itself again, and no matter how hard I tried to calm down, I couldn't. No one was in the room, but I knew I wasn't alone, and that scared me a lot. At 2 in the morning, just when I thought it was over, I heard footsteps in the kitchen and living room. My legs trembled. At that moment, I thought about calling someone, but I remained frozen, desperate, not knowing what to do. Then I saw someone standing in the doorway of the other room, behind the door. A strange, huge figure with very large, angry eyes staring at me, matted hair. For a moment, I thought it was just my imagination, a trick of fear. But then I felt that something was really wrong. The worst was when I suddenly felt cold hands on my feet pulling at them. I let out a scream of horror. At the same moment, my shoulder burned as if something had sunk into me. I jumped up, ran to the bathroom, turned on the light, and checked. To my horror, I had a bite mark, a scratch on my arm. I didn't stop trembling. I stayed awake all night, listening intently to every tiny sound in the apartment. I heard thumping footsteps and voices that seemed to come out of nowhere. Prayer was the only thing that kept me sane, and then suddenly there was complete silence. When the sun finally came up, I didn't hesitate for a minute. I quickly got dressed and went out to seek help. The first thing I did was go to a shaman in my neighborhood. I knew this was no figment of my imagination, certainly nothing of this world. There was no mundane explanation for what happened to me, and as a half-Mexican, I knew very well that the supernatural exists, even if we try to deny it and dismiss it as mere superstition. When I arrived at the shaman's house, he performed a cleansing ritual with eggs and branches, then cracked the eggs into a glass. When he finished, he looked at me and said things I never thought I would hear. He said he felt that I had seen someone and heard noises at night and that someone had actually hurt me. I asked who it could be, and he looked at me very seriously and said, "It is a demon that someone has bound to my home and to me, and the person who sent him is someone who wants revenge." I was stunned, because I had no idea about any of this. But the shaman explained to me with all his experience that the person who harmed me is someone who hates me, and that person's name is Stacy. Yes, I could barely believe it myself, but he said she had actually wanted to harm me, and that's why she had done something very dark against me. He gave me Bible verses to read at night and told me to buy a statue of Christ and place it on a small altar. He also advised me to sprinkle holy water throughout the apartment, in the corners, on my bed, everywhere, in the shape of a cross. Additionally, I would have people come over to pray over me and ask for protection. All of this, he said, would be enough to drive away this negative presence, and so it was. With everything I did, the noises and nightmares subsided. They began to disappear, and on other days I managed to sleep without fear. Stacy, who was responsible for all this madness, I never saw again. I blocked her everywhere and avoided the places where we used to hang out together. Just the thought of meeting her scared me. If she could have harmed me so much, I didn't want to see her again, not even in a picture. Now, every evening before going to sleep, I say the prayers I was taught and place the cross on my altar. Maybe there's still something in my apartment, but at least I know I'm not alone and that I can fight against it. This experience has changed me forever. I have learned that not everything we see with our eyes is the whole reality, and that there are forces that we cannot see, but which can do us great harm if we do not know how to protect ourselves. To this day, I confess that it hurts me to know what Stacy was capable of. I really valued her and believed our friendship was sincere. But as you can see, some friendships are more dangerous than they are honest. For as long as I can remember, I was always my parents' favorite child. My mother showered me with affection and never tired of bragging about how great I was. She was afraid my younger brother would fall by the wayside because it seemed all her love was reserved for me. When I started organized sports, it wasn't just my parents anymore. External attention also came into play. First, it was soccer, which I quickly got used to, and in no time, I was the team's top scorer. But my true passion I found in American football. I remember my room being covered in posters of Tom Brady and Drew Brees. I admired them and was sure that one day I would be like them. My large, strong hands allowed me to throw the ball with a precision and force that few of my peers achieved, making me a promising player in this sport. During my 3 years in high school, I was the starting quarterback, and I played so well that I could compete at the level of many seniors. This athletic ability not only gave me satisfaction on the field, it also made me the most popular boy in school. One of my teachers even nicknamed me King of the Campus because I constantly received applause and admiration from teachers and classmates. Success, however, did not come without effort. My grades had to be good for me to continue playing. Luckily, I wasn't a bad student, except in math, where I always got bad grades. In my sophomore year of high school, I decided which university I wanted to attend. I knew that if I continued to play well, I was destined to lead a professional team after graduation. A sentence I had read somewhere always echoed in me. It was about a man who held the world in the palm of his hand. That was the best description of my career so far. I felt destined for success, and nothing could stop me. The reason I'm telling all this is so you understand how promising my life was, and how close I was to throwing everything away because of an obsession. I was in my junior year of high school and already a starting player on the school team. When I wasn't studying, I spent my days between the weight room and practice, and everything was going great until Rosalia showed up. It was just another day, right before our third game of the season, and I was staring blankly in class. I remember distinctly how my classmates' attention suddenly shifted to something, and when I turned around, she was there. My breath hitched. Honestly, I had never seen anyone so beautiful, not even in the movies. She had silky brown hair, bright eyes, full red lips, and porcelain skin that made her look like an angel. In that moment, without having exchanged a word with her, I gave her my heart without hesitation. Her beauty was so overwhelming that I knew nothing and no one could compare to her. Rosalia sat in the back of the class. She was neither shy nor did she behave like a typical new student. She seemed completely aware of her effect on others and knew that the room now belonged to her. I can assure you she knew it. It was impossible to tear my eyes away from her. They clung to her silhouette as if spellbound. This day marked the beginning of a long downward spiral. I would have given anything to relive every second of that moment. It was almost impossible to focus on anything other than Rosalia. Every class since she arrived revolved solely around her, and during practice, my mind was still in the classroom, etching every detail, every curve of her body into my memory. From that day on, my thoughts revolved only around her. I cunningly got her phone number from a girl in the secretary's office, and that same night, when I led my team to another victory, all I wished was for the game to end quickly. Soon after, I was sitting outside her house, imagining us walking hand in hand through the school corridors, with everyone looking at us enviously. At that moment, I knew I would somehow possess her body and soul until the end of my life. My first step when I arrived at school the following Monday was to look for Rosalia and, so as not to be too direct, offer her my friendship. "You have to start somewhere." She smiled but wasn't overly effusive. In the next few days, I tried to get closer to her, but I didn't achieve my goals. Initially, she seemed open and friendly, but after a few days, for some reason, she started to avoid me and seemed a little scared when she saw me. I thought she was nervous. I was too. So the following week, I decided to stop beating around the bush and open my heart to her. That Monday, I met her at the lockers and excitedly told her everything I felt for her. Her reaction, however, was not what I had imagined. I spoke sincerely about all my feelings. Every word was genuine. But instead of falling into my arms, as so often in my imagination, she just said, "I'm sorry. I don't think that's a good idea," and walked away. This answer disappointed me, but I still clung to a glimmer of hope. She wasn't cruel or mocking. So I thought she was just playing hard to get. I believed I had to pursue her like a hunter pursues his prey, and I imagined I had to make some sacrifice to prove how much I loved her. That's how heroes do it in movies and romance novels. She just had to realize that I was the right one for her. I spent days and nights watching her every move, searching within myself for a way to make it happen. Then a crazy idea came to me. If I quit football for her, she would see how much she meant to me. She would realize that I loved her more than anything else in the world. Of course, that was it. So that same day, I went to the coach. The conversation was as explosive as you can imagine. He got really angry and yelled at me for almost an hour, but still wished me luck at the end of our conversation. I walked out on a cloud. I had to tell Rosalia immediately, but she was nowhere to be found. So I sent her a text message, telling her what I had just done. I didn't get an immediate reply, but when it came, it just said, "Why?" The knot in my stomach tightened. Everything I had done for her, and she still didn't understand my motives. With trembling hands, I typed, "I did it for you because I love you." It was the crucial moment. I wanted to leave no doubt about what I felt, but after I hit send, time seemed to stand still. Hours passed without a reply. Fear squeezed my chest. I couldn't take it anymore, so I rushed to her house and waited outside under her window. I roamed around in the darkness and watched her change for bed. The image of her figure is forever burned into my memory. Finally, I sent another message that I was waiting outside, and seconds later, she appeared at the window. Seeing her in a nightgown made my heart race, and I thought there could only be one reason to let me see her like that. Did she want to provoke me? My mouth went dry with tension, and I started to sweat. I hoped she would greet me with gentle words and perhaps invite me inside. Just the thought of it made my heart pound faster. Instead, she started screaming, I should leave and leave her alone. Rosalia seemed distraught, and I didn't understand her reaction. The situation escalated further when her father appeared. I tried to explain to the man why I was there and what I felt for his daughter, but he just wouldn't listen. Then Rosalia hurled a series of terrible screams and words at me that I dare not repeat. I could never have imagined something like that would happen. Every one of her insults was like a punch to the gut, and each one hurt more than the last. She said she had tried to be nice, but found no way to make it clear to me that she didn't want me around. She said she didn't like me, and that I was a creepy guy who constantly bothered her. What the hell was she talking about? I loved her and had made a huge sacrifice for her. I was so upset that I didn't hear the word police until it was almost too late. I ran just as I saw the blue lights on the street. At that moment, I jumped into the car and sped off as if that were the only safe place. The further I drove, the louder my sobs became until they completely consumed me, a heartbreaking pain. That night, I fled to bed, writhed, and cried inconsolably like a small child. But as the tears slowly dried, something changed within me, and the pain of Rosalia's unjust rejection slowly transformed into a fire of rage that began to burn ever brighter. consuming the sadness I had felt before and turning it into pure resentment. As dawn broke, I had made a decision. Something inside me had changed. It was as if a monster had emerged that I didn't know was inside me, and soon I lost control. I felt consumed by anger. No one should say such things to someone who loves them because it can destroy them. The thought of revenge began as a fleeting idea, but then became a kind of outcry that I could no longer ignore. Rosalia had hurt me like no one else in the world, while I did nothing but love her. She was evil and she had to pay for it. That's what I thought at the time. That morning, I entered school with a clear goal. Anger clouded my mind, and I couldn't think of the consequences of what I was about to do. As I approached Rosalia, I saw the terror grow in her eyes, and a dark satisfaction took hold of me. I said nothing. I just grabbed her by the neck and squeezed tightly. Her face turned red, almost purple, and her eyes looked at me full of fear. It was as if time stood still. At that moment, I barely registered her friend's attempts to pull us apart. I just stared into those green eyes I had so often admired and watched them redden and become bloodshot. This sight of her beauty amidst the panic intensified my anger, as if her vulnerability made me even stronger. It was a kind of ecstasy I cannot describe. The next thing I remember is lying on the school floor, restrained. The echo of screams sounded distant, as if coming from elsewhere. As I stared at the confusing pattern of the ceiling tiles, I don't know how much time passed before I was told that Rosalia had survived. Although this news surprised me, it brought me no relief. I just felt numb. It took months to painstakingly put myself back together, to remember who I had been before. I remember being afraid to feel anything at all, but when I did, I became a scared boy. I was fortunate enough to be sent to a psychiatric facility focused on therapeutic rehabilitation. And even if I am not fully cured, I use that word with caution. I know there are times when my dark side resurfaces. Nevertheless, I try to move forward. I blame no one but myself for what happened. Today, I know how easy it is to get lost in a sea of false thoughts if you don't control your emotions. I was so obsessed with Rosalia that I built an idyllic world around us. I could never see the real signs that she didn't feel the same way. It was as if I was unable to distinguish my fantasy from reality, and that led me to do foolish and truly reprehensible things, ruining my own life. The reason I'm writing this is to record the events that led me to my current situation. My therapist and I agreed that writing down my thoughts and feelings would be helpful, not just to get rid of the demons that have tormented me for so long, but also so that others can recognize these psychopathic traits in themselves or someone around them and seek help before it's too late. It's encouraging to see how far I've come, even if it has also revealed the most disturbing part of myself, something that even scares me. Little by little, I notice that I am beginning to become the person I once was. Maybe one day I will recognize myself again and be able to resume my career as an athlete, although I know that what happened is a major blemish on my record. And right now, everyone probably hates me and considers me too dangerous to be around. I know this is only the beginning of my path to atonement. The truth is, what I did is inexcusable, and every day I grapple with guilt and remorse. But I firmly believe that by sharing my story, I can contribute to positive change, and perhaps one day I will find a way to rehabilitate myself, not only to myself, but also to the world. I work as a financial advisor at a large bank in my city. In 2018, we welcomed a new colleague to the department. His name was Ivan, and he had been transferred to our office from another branch. From day one, Ivan won everyone over. He was a very sociable guy, extremely friendly and quite talkative. In our office, everyone gets along well. We're really a great team, so much so that every Friday after work, we usually meet at a nearby bar to have a few drinks and a good time, also to get rid of the stress of the week. That Friday, we decided to invite Ivan to welcome him, and we really liked him. He seamlessly integrated into the group, told many jokes, and was truly the life of the party. He was a bit talkative and constantly spoke about his experiences, all the things he had done, the places he had visited, and much more. But all in all, he was a very nice person. So we soon became friends and went out together almost every weekend. I noticed the better I got to know him, the more the versions of his stories could change. He always spoke of all the beautiful women he had conquered and even celebrities he had dated. Over time, I learned to take everything he said with a grain of salt. I knew much of it wasn't true, but it was entertaining to go out with him, because all in all, he was a good guy. One day, Ivan invited me to travel with him to Florida and spend a few days at his sister's apartment, which was very close to the beach and would be empty all weekend. So he invited me and another friend, Nestor, with whom we also often went out. I happily accepted because I love the sea and especially the nightlife in Miami. That Friday, we all took the same flight, and his sister picked us up at the airport. She was very nice and friendly to us. After that, we drove to the apartment complex. When we arrived at the apartment, I was pleasantly surprised. The place was bigger and nicer than I had imagined. There were 3 bedrooms. Ivan and his sister took one, while Nestor and I shared the third, and we agreed that if one of us met a girl, the other would sleep on the sofa. We arrived early, just after noon, so we decided to spend the afternoon at the beach and visit some bars later. Ivan started drinking early and got drunk very quickly, but the atmosphere was really relaxed, and no one else drank much, so I didn't understand why Ivan drank so much. I told him to slow down when I noticed he was getting aggressive with people. This seemed strange to me, as I had gone out with him before and it was the first time I had seen him like this. But that wasn't the worst part. He started approaching every girl he saw and hitting on them in a very blunt way. 9 out of 10 rejected him and looked visibly uncomfortable. Nestor and I initially laughed a little at the situation until it stopped being funny, because Ivan crossed the line and it became embarrassing for us to be seen with him. At one point, he started flirting very aggressively with the girlfriend of a man who was much older than him. The man warned him to stop bothering her, but Ivan ignored him and continued to badger the girl, so the man confronted him. At this point, Nestor and I were forced to intervene. We pulled Ivan away and apologized to the man. It was truly embarrassing. As we walked away from the bar, Ivan got angry. He pushed me and started yelling at us, calling us pieces of garbage for not supporting him. I tried to calm him down, but he was out of control, so he left alone. Nestor and I assumed he had gone back to the apartment, so we just continued. But that was just the beginning of a chaotic weekend. After he left, Nestor and I went back and finished our drinks. Some of the girls he had been bothering even came up to us. We chatted and spent time together. They gave us their numbers, but at some point they started making jokes about how we could hang out with a guy like that. These girls also said they would be going to a club later, and we arranged to meet them there. After that, I texted Ivan to find out where he had gone, and he replied that he was in the apartment. Nestor and I went back to the apartment complex, expecting to find a very angry Ivan. Instead, as soon as we opened the door, he jumped off the sofa with a big grin and asked us if we were ready to go out that night. He said he realized he had been very drunk, so he decided to calm down a bit at home before going out that evening. Nestor and I took it as a good sign that he at least realized he had been drunk and was clear-headed enough to understand that he needed to calm down. So we forgot about the previous incident and told him about the girls and how we had gotten their numbers. He was excited and smiling, and then he asked us how many girls there were. I told him 2, and at that moment, his smile completely froze. It got worse when Nestor joked that the girls had approached us right after he left and asked where we knew him from. He didn't mean it in a bad way. He said it as if he wanted to tease him a little, something we typically do among friends, but Ivan took it very badly. He got angry, turned around, and went into his room, slamming the door shut behind him. At that moment, I realized that something was wrong with this guy. I turned to his sister and asked her if he was always like this, and she just replied, yes. I started to regret accepting his invitation. This became very uncomfortable. I wanted to convince myself that it was all because of the drinks, that it would be better tomorrow, and he would reconsider his behavior from the day before, so I tried not to dwell on it any further. In the meantime, Nestor and I decided to go to our room and relax a bit while getting ready for the club that night. Ivan never left the room, so I went over, knocked on the door, and asked him if he wanted to come with us tonight to meet the girls. But he didn't answer, so Nestor and I went without him. As soon as we arrived at the club, he started bombarding my phone with messages saying things like, "Where the hell are you? How could you go without me? I'm going to throw your stuff into the street. Don't come back, you piece of trash. You're a traitor," and 10,000 other things. When my phone wouldn't stop ringing, Nestor and the girls started asking what was wrong, so I showed them the messages and everyone looked pretty worried. It was clear that something was seriously wrong with Ivan. We were having a great time with the girls. We hadn't even been out for an hour, but we had to end the night, call an Uber, and drive back to the apartment. When we arrived, we found Ivan sitting on a sofa, staring at the wall. I asked him if everything was okay, and he simply replied yes, got up, turned around, and locked himself back in his room. Nestor and I looked at each other and went to our room as if the evening was ruined, so we went to sleep. We stayed up for a long time, talking about everything, especially about Ivan and his strange behavior. Suddenly, we heard footsteps approaching the door, and we knew it was Ivan. Nestor whispered to me that he was standing outside, probably with his ear to the door. We remained silent for a while until we finally heard the footsteps continue into the living room. But then I heard him talking. No one else could be heard, so I crept on tiptoes to the door, opened it carefully, and peeked out to see where he was and who he was talking to. That's when I saw him in the living room, head pressed against the wall, talking to himself and laughing. The creepiest thing, however, was what he was saying. Ivan was talking about me, saying things like, "Fred is trash, Fred is a fool, and you brought them into your house to ruin you." And then he laughed. Honestly, that scared me and made me sad at the same time. It was obvious that Ivan had serious psychological problems, because at this point he wasn't drinking anymore. I carefully closed the door and went back to bed. Then I told Nestor what I had just seen and heard. He was just as shocked as I was. We started whispering and agreed that it would be best to leave in the morning, pack our bags, and find a hotel, as neither of us wanted to stay there another day. While we were talking, we heard him go into his room and close the door. Only then did we calm down and fall asleep. About 30 minutes later, however, I was woken by the sound of a slamming door. I shot up in bed, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw him standing in the doorway with an almost devilish look on his face. I asked him what he was doing when he suddenly lunged at me and started strangling me, yelling, "I am trash and must die." While I struggled to get his hands off my neck, and Nestor tried to get him off me as best he could. Nestor managed to pull him off me and held him by the arms so he couldn't move. I tried to talk to him and calm him down because he was literally screaming like a madman, calling me ungrateful and a traitor, that he had invited me and I had treated him like trash and talked about him to his sister. I tried to reason with him and make him understand that it wasn't like that, but he was out of control, and you can't reason with a mentally ill person. At that moment, his sister joined us and managed to get him under control a bit. And Nestor and I took the opportunity to pack all our belongings, call an Uber, and go to a hotel where we stayed until Sunday, when it was time to travel back to our city. The following week, I met Ivan several times in the office, but we avoided talking to each other the whole time. Luckily, he was transferred to another office shortly after, and only then could I relax. This guy is a living example of the saying, "Don't judge a book by its cover." I never thought I'd experience something like this, but to this day, every time I think back to 2016, a shiver runs down my spine. I was in my third year of college and shared an off-campus apartment with two guys, Jason and Liam. To be honest, I barely knew them at the time, but we quickly became friends, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. Weekends were usually pretty relaxed. Beer, silly tours, crazy stunts that almost always ended with someone losing their wallet or breaking their phone screen. That kind of stuff, you know. One Friday evening, Liam told a rumor about an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. He had heard that people lived there, some kind of free community or something, and someone from his psychology class had mentioned it was a cool place to hang out. Everything was covered in graffiti, old machines, and it had a super weird atmosphere. It sounded like a typical story you make up to scare others. Until Jason, who was always more curious, said, "That sounds interesting." And since I had nothing better to do, I was ready for the adventure. So the next day, with some energy drinks and Jason's old car, we set off to see what was true. The place was in a really run-down neighborhood, surrounded by boarded-up buildings or ones with broken windows. The factory was huge, much bigger than I thought. Sprawling open halls, rusted machinery everywhere, metal beams hanging from the ceiling, and abandoned conveyor belts on the floor. It smelled of dampness, dust, and wet concrete. Most of the windows were covered or blind, letting in little light, and inside it was almost completely dark. Here and there, mattresses were scattered around, piles of old clothes. It clearly looked like people lived there, but surprisingly, we heard nothing. No music, no voices. Nothing to indicate presence. We laughed a bit and said it felt like a zombie movie. And honestly, each of us had our own thoughts. It was kind of creepy. Liam started taking pictures of the graffiti, which in reality were just boring tags, scribbled drawings, and nothing special. We walked for a long time through workshops, past a loading dock, places where you know a lot has happened, but where you don't see anyone. There were burn marks on the walls, melted candles stuck on stacked boxes, and many signs that people had been here, but no sign of life. Gradually, we came to a wide corridor that branched off in several directions. Jason wanted to go upstairs, while Liam went in the other direction to explore more walls full of junk art and graffiti. I thought about looking at everything again at the back, and then coming back without a clear plan to find them again. We agreed to meet again in about 15 minutes and to stay in touch. We should have stayed together. You never split up in places like that, but we were a bit stupid and didn't think about it further. The further I went, the denser the darkness became. My phone's flashlight, already dim, was slowly running out, and the walls covered in felt-tip pen scribbles exuded a strange atmosphere, without me feeling really in danger, just strange. Once, when I looked back, I thought I saw someone walking in the distance, but assumed it was Jason or Liam catching up to me and paid no attention to it. Then I entered a larger room that looked like an old common room or an office. The windows were completely covered. There were broken chairs and a table with empty beer cans scattered everywhere. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in, when I suddenly heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and to my surprise, it wasn't my friends. It was a man. He looked to be in his early 20s, slender, with long hair tied in a loose bun. He was wearing a dirty flannel shirt, ripped jeans, and no shoes. He looked like a character you'd imagine in a drum circle talking about energies and stuff. At that moment, I thought he was one of the residents of the place. So not very convinced, I said, "Hi, I didn't mean to disturb anyone." The guy smiled slightly, shrugged, and said, "No, I was just here." Most people don't get too far into the building. His voice was calm, hoarse, but not aggressive. I gave my name, and he said his name was Jim and that he had been here for a while. Most people came and went, but it was basically pretty quiet. I asked if it was okay for us to be there, and he said, "Yes, don't touch things. Some people don't like that." We chatted for a few more minutes, nothing deep, nothing that would put us in danger. He said he used to live in a van and this factory was better than the street. I didn't know what to say and just listened. Then he suddenly said something that shocked me a little. "Do you want to see something cool?" and pointed to a door a little further ahead. I was unsure, but he had been friendly and didn't seem dangerous, so I followed him. We walked down a hallway and entered a smaller, windowless room that smelled worse than the rest. The room was full of trash, old clothes, cans, boxes, junk everywhere. As soon as we were inside, he slammed the door shut. I was stunned and stared at him with wide eyes. "It's okay," he said. "Just give me your wallet and your phone, then it's fine." At that moment, my instincts screamed at me to do what he said, but I ignored them. I wasn't just going to give this guy my stuff, so I said no. Then he came at me. I backed away until my back was against the wall. I didn't want to fight, but I was very scared. He didn't have a weapon, but I didn't want to take any risks. He said he was serious and I was making it difficult. Instead of cooperating, I started yelling for Jason and Liam as loudly as I could, but they didn't come. He tried to reach into my pockets and I pushed him away. We got into a scuffle, and in the struggle, I lost control. He managed to take my wallet. I kept screaming, hoping someone would hear me. Nothing. He punched me in the face, which threw me off balance a bit, yelling for me to be quiet. Then he grabbed my phone and pushed me. I fell to the ground on some scattered junk. When I got back up, he had already disappeared through another door that led deeper into the building. I didn't follow him. I just wanted out. I ran as fast as I could, calling for Jason and Liam again, but they didn't answer. When I finally reached our entry point outside, I saw no sign of them. I looked around, thinking maybe they were waiting in the car, so I climbed through the hole in the fence onto the street. And guess what? The car was gone. They had left me high and dry, abandoned me there alone. I stood there for a few minutes, staring at the empty spot, not comprehending what had happened. I called again, walked around, waited for them to come back. Nothing. I walked a whole mile to seek help until I found a gas station. I spoke to the people there, half in shock, told them I had been left behind, and asked if I could use their phone. But the guy at the gas station said, "No, I couldn't." It's amazing how indifferent some people can be. Maybe he also thought I was homeless because I looked terrible after the altercation with that guy, not to mention the smell. I sat down on the sidewalk and looked around. I was kind of lost. My head was pounding, my shoulder hurt. Suddenly, a man who was refueling his pickup truck came up to me and asked if everything was okay. I briefly explained what had happened, and after a moment of apparently not quite believing me, he said I should get in. He was going that way anyway and could give me a ride. I had just had an unpleasant surprise trusting a stranger, but at that moment, I didn't have many options, so I got in. The ride lasted about 25 minutes, and he dropped me off a few blocks from my apartment. I thanked him and walked the rest of the way. When I came in, Jason and Liam were sitting on the couch watching TV, both with surprised looks on their faces. Jason looked at me and said, "Everything okay, buddy?" And I just stared at them. Liam looked uncomfortable. "We heard you screaming. We got scared. We thought something had happened to you or something." I asked them if they had really left me there, just to get it confirmed because it was obvious. They said nothing. They were silent for a few seconds until Jason blurted out, "We were going to call someone when we got out, but we thought you'd come out." I didn't answer. I just walked away to my room and closed the door so I didn't have to look at them. Later, they came in and tried to justify themselves. They had panicked. It had been a mistake. They hadn't wanted anything to happen to me. The truth is, we never talked like that again. I stopped going out with them, and we only ran into each other in the apartment. The relationship was never the same, and every time I think about that day, I get goosebumps. I always wonder what would have happened if the guy had a knife or if things had gone differently. But what still bothers me most is that my friends left me there, even though they heard me calling for help without even checking if I would get to safety. They just turned around and drove away as if I was worth nothing to them, and I will never forget that. In my circle of friends, I've always been the only person who loves nature. Ever since I was a child, I went hiking with my parents. I don't know what attracted me so much to it. Maybe the rustling of the leaves in the wind or the satisfaction of reaching the summit after a hard climb. But the truth is, this connection to nature always gave me peace. It was like a break from the chaotic city life. Now I'm 32, and honestly, I've hiked almost all of the most impressive trails in the country, but I needed more. I yearned for adrenaline and to explore new places. So one afternoon after work, I started searching the internet and stumbled upon an article titled Hiker's Paradise. The title immediately captivated me, and as I realized it was about a jungle in Guatemala, and I was completely enthralled by what it said. That's when I knew I had to go there. So I called a few friends to see who wanted to join me on this adventure. "Hey Sabrina, it's Alex," I said, and before she could answer, I started telling her about this incredible jungle in Guatemala and how great it would be if she and two other friends came along. Sure, sounds interesting," Sabrina replied after my monologue. Then I called my friend Mark. He was in too, so everything was settled, and the 1 week wait felt endless. Every minute trapped in that cubicle at the office made me feel like I was suffocating until finally, the day of the trip arrived and we were at the airport. I was grinning from ear to ear while my friends looked tired and sleepy. We had flown very early, but I didn't care. "Ready for adventure. I'm so excited," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Yes, Alex, we know," Mark retorted, while Sabrina rolled her eyes. I guess my morning energy was a bit too much for them. After a 4-hour flight, we finally landed, and I must say, from the air, the country looked spectacular. Upon our arrival, we were welcomed with open arms by the friendly locals, and after checking into the hotel and having something to eat, we set off into the jungle. "Excuse me, if you want to hike here, you need a guide," one of the employees warned us when he heard our plans. "Really, I'm an expert." "We'll be fine," I replied confidently. But the man insisted that the place was unknown to us and it could be dangerous for someone without experience in that specific jungle. Finally, we agreed to hire a guide and set off. "What's so special about this place? I've read that it has one of the best trails in the world," I asked the guide as we entered the jungle. "Yes, it's quite beautiful once you get to the top, so it's very special," he replied and continued walking. He didn't seem very talkative. "How long will the hike take?" Sabrina asked. "It depends on our pace, but I can assure you that we'll have to camp tonight," he said. We were prepared. We had sleeping bags, tents, and all the necessary equipment. Time flew by as we enjoyed the scenery, and before we knew it, night had fallen. "So we should set up camp, right?" I asked the guide. He nodded. As the night progressed, I noticed that he seemed a bit nervous and frequently looked around. "What's wrong?" I asked, but he didn't answer. He was too busy paying attention to every sound he heard. "I'm bored," Sabrina said. "This is camping. What did you expect?" I retorted, looking into the fire we had lit. "Yeah, but how about we play something?" she suggested. "Sure, why not?" I said, looking at the guide, but he didn't seem interested in joining at all. "Do you want to play hide and seek?" I asked him. The guide looked at me as if I had said something inappropriate. "All right, but don't go too far from the camp," he said, and I nodded. "Let's go," I said to my friends, and the game began. It was my turn, so I counted to 10 and set off to search. First, I wanted to find Sabrina, calling her name everywhere. "Sabrina," I called as I walked, but after about 5 minutes of walking, something dawned on me. "Damn, I'm lost," I said. Luckily, I had my flashlight with me, but I didn't see much more than trees. The area was completely unfamiliar to me. So I went back, or so I thought, when I suddenly stepped on something. This must be a stream, I thought, shining my flashlight on the liquid I had stepped in. But I jumped back as the light showed what it really was: blood. My heart raced, and I instinctively took a few steps back. But then I decided to follow the trail with my flashlight. When I came to the source of the blood, my heart stopped. There was Sabrina, pressed against a tree. Her head was beside her, decapitated. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. A scream caught in my throat, and my legs began to tremble like jelly. Then I heard a sound in the bushes and ran, terrified, faster and faster, until I tripped over a stone and fell face first into the mud. I quickly jumped up and wiped my face, but when I looked at my hand, it was red. I had fallen into another puddle of blood, and right next to it lay another body, a man with severed limbs and open eyes. What the hell is going on here? I screamed and ran in the opposite direction, completely overwhelmed with fear. As I fled, I kept looking back until I suddenly bumped into something. I started screaming like crazy when I realized that what I had bumped into was alive. So I jumped up and shone my flashlight on it. It was Mark. "What's wrong, buddy?" he asked, but I had no answers. I just wanted to get out of the jungle as fast as possible, so I yelled at him to run, and he did immediately. After an hour or two of searching, we finally found the camp. The guide was there by the fire, packing his backpack. "What are you doing? Where are you going? What happened to Sabrina?" we asked him desperately. "I told you not to go far from camp," he said, hastily stuffing his belongings into his backpack. "I have to go now, and if you know what's good for you, you'll come with me." So we did. The entire way back was utterly terrifying. I constantly heard noises around us as if there were an animal, but it also sounded like heavy breathing. "Please, what's going on here? What are those noises?" I asked the guide. "Shut up and keep moving," he retorted. And as soon as we were out of the jungle, we went to the police to report what had happened. But they didn't seem surprised. One officer said something to another in a language we didn't understand. "We're sorry for your loss. You shouldn't have gone there," the officer told us before leaving. The next day, they retrieved the bodies from the jungle and brought them back home. I don't know what happened in that jungle. We were only told it was a wild animal, perhaps a puma. But I'm not sure. The reaction of the people seemed to indicate that they were used to what had happened. And that was the last time I went on an excursion. After that terrible night, the memories of what I had experienced haunted my nightmares. So I was forced to start therapy to deal with my trauma. I couldn't help but feel guilty about what happened to Sabrina. I still do. But now I know that what lurks in that jungle is something completely beyond my control or anyone else's. This story happened to me a few years ago when I was 17 and still in high school. Honestly, I will never forget that night in the forest because it left a mark and made me think a lot. The story begins with my friend Alex and me. We always loved adventures and crazy stunts. So one day we planned to go camping with a few friends in a forest near the city. The idea was simple: spend the night outdoors, watch the stars, chat, and switch off from everything for a while. Initially, two other guys, Mike and Danny, were also invited, but for some reason they couldn't come along. So in the end, it was just the two of us, and the girl Alex was dating, Emily. For some reason, they also decided to bring one of Emily's friends, a girl named Lisa. I didn't know her particularly well. I had seen her a few times at school, but I hadn't spent much time with her. The plan was to spend the whole night in the middle of nature, far from the city and technology. Alex picked me up early in the morning, and when I arrived at his place, everyone was already by the front door, ready to leave. Lisa was there. She seemed cheerful, a little mysterious, with long dark hair and eyes that looked directly at you. At that moment, I didn't dislike her, but I wasn't overly enthusiastic about her either. The car ride was long, about 4 hours. Most of the time, Lisa didn't say much, only when you asked her a question. And although she seemed quiet at first, everything changed as soon as she started talking. Honestly, it was strange, because she told very dark stories in a quite peculiar way. She spoke of revenge stories, of arguments with people who had offended her, of old friends with whom she had had fierce confrontations, things that really made the hairs on your neck stand up. She even mentioned ex-boyfriends whom she had supposedly taught a lesson they would never forget, and she said this with a smile on her face, as if it was completely normal. At first, I thought this was just her way of telling stories, a bit exaggerated, or maybe she was saying it to get attention. But over time, I realized that she was serious, that she liked this dark streak of taking revenge and enjoyed that feeling. I tried not to pay too much attention to it. And luckily, Emily laughed at everything she said as if it were a joke, and Alex seemed to ignore it. But inside me, something didn't feel right. When we finally arrived at the campsite, I already regretted coming. The area was ravaged by rain, mud was everywhere. As soon as we got out of the car, swarms of mosquitoes attacked us. Everything was damp, murky, and sticky, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this night wouldn't go well. We struggled to set up the tents in a muddy clearing, and no sooner had we finished than it started pouring again. From then on, everything was pretty miserable. The rain didn't stop, and all we could do was seek shelter under a tarp Alex had brought. We actually wanted to walk in the forest, fish in a nearby lake, things like that. But in this weather, everything was off. The only advantage of that first night was that the storm eventually subsided a bit, and we managed to make a campfire, which helped us keep the feeling that we were still at a normal campsite. We sat around with a few beers and tried to make the best of the situation. Alex and Emily huddled together on one side, and on the other, I eventually sat next to Lisa, who suddenly started telling another one of her stories. This time, the story was even more surreal, something about a colleague at work who had annoyed her, and in revenge after work. She had slashed his car tires in the parking lot so he would be stranded, and she told this with such a cold, eerie smile that it really sent a shiver down my spine. The casualness with which she described it, as if it were something funny, made me uncomfortable. I told her that was crazy and tried not to show my nervousness. She just shrugged and laughed. Some people need to learn their lesson. The hard way, she said, still with that calm but unsettling expression. I stared at her, unable to shake the thought that this girl was actually not quite right in the head. Alex seemed neither surprised nor bothered by the story, and instead tried to change the subject, as if nothing had happened. Honestly, after that, I couldn't sleep anymore. I got up tired and said I would retreat to the tent to rest. I crawled into my tent and lay there for hours with my ears perked up, listening for every sound outside. The night was endless, and at some point, I decided that even if I didn't want to stay awake all night, I would at least try to sleep. Around 2 a.m., however, I started hearing footsteps outside the tent. At first, I thought it was an animal or maybe a forest goblin, but after a few minutes, I noticed that the footsteps weren't moving away, but getting closer and closer, and then in the blink of an eye, my tent collapsed. At first, I thought a large branch had fallen on it, but then I heard blows. Loud blows as if someone or something was hitting it with a log. I crouched down to protect myself, but I couldn't hide much and the blows didn't stop. I was entangled in the remains of the tent, unable to move, and the blows continued. At that moment, a shout rang out, and in the chaos, I heard Alex's voice. He must have had a flashlight in his hand and came to see what was going on. Just when I thought I was going to die there, I heard Lisa's voice. "Hey, relax. It was just a joke." That word, joke, drove me crazy. I scrambled out of the wreckage, and Alex stood there with the flashlight, looking at me with an expression that said he didn't understand what the hell was going on. I snapped at her. "What's wrong with you? What are you doing?" She just shrugged and laughed with the same cold, eerie smile as before. Alex tried to smooth things over, saying it must have been a misunderstanding, but I didn't believe it for a second. In fact, from that moment on, I couldn't sleep at all. I no longer had a tent to crawl into, so I sat silently by the campfire all night, heart racing, hoping that this girl wouldn't appear next to me again. Otherwise, I really couldn't guarantee my reaction. What a crazy woman. The next morning, Lisa acted as if nothing had happened. She was super cheerful, laughing, telling stories, and acting as if it was all nothing to talk about. I told him I had to leave, that I didn't want to stay there, but Alex refused and started making excuses for Lisa. It was just a strange joke. I left angrily, but there wasn't much I could do. In the end, we had to drive back in silence, and from that night on, I broke contact with Alex. I didn't speak to him for months until he broke up with Emily again. Then we reconnected. He constantly apologized, but in truth, I knew he was only doing it because Emily and her psychopathic friend were no longer a part of his life. Since then, I realized that he hadn't been a true friend and that perhaps not everything was as it seemed. That night in the forest left a mark on me, and every time I think about it, my stomach tightens. I assure you, I never wanted to go back to that area, and even now, when I drive past it, I remember that story and I feel sick. Anyway, that's my experience. And believe me, to this day, I am amazed at how a night that started completely normal can turn into a nightmare in a matter of seconds. I never thought I would experience something like that, but life holds surprises, and sometimes not in the best way. It all began with a message on Facebook. It was from Amara, a childhood friend I had lost contact with years ago. I remembered her as a cheerful, funny girl with an infectious smile, with whom I played every afternoon. But we hadn't heard from each other for a long time because she and her family had moved to Mexico for a while, and then we lost touch. When I now saw that she had written to me, I couldn't suppress a certain curiosity and some nostalgia. "Hi, it's been so long since we last spoke. How are you? I'd love to hear from you again," her message read. I didn't think twice, replied with a smile, and soon we exchanged numbers and started texting. Amara seemed as warm and funny as ever. She said she had been traveling a lot for work and was now temporarily back in town, but she planned to return to Mexico in a few weeks to fulfill professional obligations there. The next day we met in a cafe, and in the following days we went out, had fun, and told each other about our lives. It was wonderful to spend this time with her. Amara was still the enthusiastic, witty girl she had always been, and it really felt like no time had passed. Our friendship was still intact. "Do you want to come along? It would be like an adventure together," she said after the club when I took her to her apartment. Amara worked as an event promoter and was about to travel to Cancun for an assignment. She was supposed to be there for 2 weeks and then return to the United States. The truth is, her suggestion caught me off guard. I had never been to Mexico, let alone Cancun, but of course I had heard many incredible things about this paradise. She said I shouldn't worry about the money. The company would pay for everything. I would come along as her assistant, and we would have 2 fantastic weeks. Who could say no to such an offer? Of course, I didn't hesitate and said yes. I remember that moment as if it were yesterday. She took my hands and we jumped up and down with joy like 2 schoolgirls, just like when we were children. I couldn't have imagined in a million years what a nightmare I would experience. The first 2 days we spent sightseeing, eating delicious food, and visiting incredible beaches. I was so excited I could barely contain myself. Everything seemed perfect, and Amara was the best company in the world. I was so happy to have found her again and rekindled our childhood friendship in such a magical place. There was only one thing that made me wonder. I hadn't seen her do any real work at any point, just phone calls and constant texting, for which she always retreated to a secluded place. As if she didn't want me to overhear her conversations. I didn't really think much of it. I was too overwhelmed by the whole experience and too grateful that Amara had taken me along to be suspicious. So I let her be and focused on enjoying the time. On the morning of our third day, Amara invited me to spend a few days in a small hotel near the beach that she had booked the night before. She said the event she was preparing was slightly delayed and her team wouldn't arrive for a few days. That's why she thought it was a good idea to take me to this place, which she said was very special. I thought that was fine. I trusted her, so I had no objection. What I didn't know was that this day would change everything. The day everything turned into a nightmare began like any other, with laughter and plans to explore and have fun. But the moment I arrived in the village, I felt a strange atmosphere. During the drive, Amara kept looking at her phone and receiving messages. I noticed that her demeanor was different. She seemed a little nervous, not at all like the relaxed, witty Amara of the past few days. The village we arrived at was more remote than I had imagined, and honestly, it wasn't particularly attractive, at least at first glance. It looked stark, with unpaved roads, precarious buildings, and a lot of vegetation all around. It also seemed to be in the middle of nowhere. All of this, combined with Amara's strange demeanor, gave me an uneasy feeling, as if something was wrong. She seemed to notice my discomfort, immediately smiled at me, took my hand, and led me to a small taco stand nearby. We had lunch there, but even though she tried very hard to seem normal, Amara's nervousness was obvious, and she started making me uneasy. It was as if she knew something I didn't know. Nevertheless, I decided to trust her again and shake off this strange feeling. After that, we went to a small guest house a few houses down, a simple but tidy house. We left our things there, and I took the opportunity to shower and change, as the heat was stifling. When I came out, I noticed that Amara wasn't in the room. I looked out the window and saw her talking on the phone outside. She looked serious and a little scared, looking around as if to make sure no one was listening. But when she came back into the room, her manner was completely different. She came in with a big smile and said we would be going to a special place later. That night, she took me to a place that looked like an old house in the middle of the woods, far from the village and any signs of life. An old car picked us up, and we drove down a gravel road until we arrived. As we drove down that road, a voice in my head warned me that something was wrong. Worried. I asked Amara several times where we were going, but she only assured me it was a surprise and everything would be fine. I couldn't ignore the fact that Amara was more taciturn than usual, as was the driver, who didn't say a single word the whole way. When we arrived, there was a small wooden house that seemed abandoned. The walls were covered in cobwebs and the wood creaked in the wind. Outside, there were 2 water tanks, and a little further back, an old, mud-stained pickup truck. This didn't look good, and at that moment, my heart started beating faster. What is this place? What are we doing here, Amara? I asked, trying to remain calm. Then she turned to me, gave me a smile that seemed forced and strained, and at that exact moment, her eyes revealed the truth. This was a trap. I'm sorry, friend, she whispered. Instinctively, I took 2 steps back and tried to run, but the driver stopped me. Suddenly, 2 men emerged from the darkness and grabbed me by both arms, dragging me into the house. What's going on? I screamed, but they just laughed and said things in Spanish that I didn't understand. 2 phrases, however, I did understand. Welcome and thank you, Amara. Fear completely overwhelmed me. I tried to resist, to kick, to defend myself somehow, but it was useless. I was desperate and scared to death, and Amara just stood there, silently watching them drag me into that horrible place, with an expression I couldn't decipher, while the driver handed her a package. The last thing I saw was the 2 of them getting into the car and driving away, leaving me to these men at their mercy as if I were cargo. At that moment, I barely understood that in truth, she wasn't the friend I had taken her for and that I had been sold. But for what exactly, I still didn't know. No, please, I pleaded. Realizing that this was all much worse than I had ever imagined, they dragged me into the house and threw me into a dark room. In the darkness, I started crying desperately. It seemed impossible that I was in this situation. It was like living a nightmare. I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. Who were these people? Kidnappers, drug dealers, organ traffickers, pimps? I had no idea. I only knew that I was in great danger. At that moment, I started searching my pockets for my phone, but I couldn't find it. I really don't know when they had taken it from me, or if maybe Amara had taken it when I wasn't looking. Panic and despair overcame me, and I started banging on the door and screaming, "Please let me go." But that only made one of the men come in, hit me in the face, and threatened to tie me up. This man spoke perfect English. Through my tears, I asked him what they intended to do with me. His answer sent shivers down my spine. "Don't worry, we won't kill you. Young, pretty girls like you are much more useful to us alive. Don't make me hit you again. Our clients don't like damaged goods." After these words, my heart sank deep. At that moment, I knew exactly who these men were and what they intended to do with me. I couldn't believe that Amara had been cruel enough to sell me to a human trafficking ring. What a monster she had become. My memories of that moment are truly dark. Never in my life had I felt so scared and vulnerable. All I remember is sitting on the floor with my back against the wooden wall, crying like a baby. I don't know for how long, minutes or hours. At some point, I tried to get up, and as I placed my hand on one of the planks on the wall, it gave slightly and creaked. I paused, tried again, and gently pushed the plank with my hand. It moved. I could hardly believe it. The plank was loose, and through the gap, I saw in the moonlight that the opening was about 20 to 25 cm wide. I had always been quite slender, and I knew that if I moved carefully, I could fit through. At that moment, adrenaline rushed through my body. I was almost euphoric as I realized I had a chance to escape this hell. However, I knew this was a huge risk. I had no idea how many people were actually there. I heard the two men talking in the front of the house, but there was no guarantee that there weren't more people around the house. And if they caught me, that could be the end of me. On the other hand, this was my only chance, so I had to take it no matter what. Carefully, without making any noise, I managed to slowly loosen the board and let it fall down, creating a small opening in the wood. Secretly, I reached in and was able to loosen it even further. When the opportunity arose, I slipped through the gap, crawling through with force and trying not to make any noise. The cold of the night hit me full in the face, but that was the least of my problems. On tiptoes, I set off and plunged into the undergrowth, trying to remember the way we had come. My heart raced, and adrenaline surged through every fiber of my body. I could still hear the voices of my captors in the distance until, at some point, I no longer heard them. Luckily, they hadn't noticed my absence, at least until I was far enough away. I crept through the forest in the darkness, practically aimlessly. I just tried to find my way as best I could. I don't know how long I walked through the vegetation, probably hours. I was thirsty and my muscles burned. But at some point, I started to see lights passing by and heard the unmistakable sound of cars on a road. When I emerged from the forest, I recognized a wide main road with many cars on it. Without thinking, I ran into the roadway, waving my arms and asking for help. Almost immediately, a truck with an elderly couple stopped. They widened their eyes when they saw me and quickly let me in. On the way, I tried to explain to them in my broken Spanish what had happened, and they took me to the nearest police station. Luckily, one of the officers on duty spoke English, so I could finally file a report. I had nowhere to stay for the night, as all my belongings had been left behind in the guest house in the village, so I stayed at the station. Fortunately, the police managed to retrieve my belongings. They were still there, as was Amara. However, she managed to escape a few minutes before the patrol cars arrived. Unfortunately, neither she nor my captors were caught. The police told me, however, that I had been very lucky to escape. Most likely, it was a dangerous human trafficking mafia active in the area that they had been monitoring for months. Thank God I returned safely to my country, but I never heard from Amara again. Furthermore, I filed a formal complaint in my home country in case she ever sets foot on U.S. soil again, so that she ends up behind bars. I cannot put into words how grateful I am to have survived this experience. I am sure it was more than just luck. It was divine providence that allows me to tell my story here. I am convinced that God heard my prayers and pulled the strings so that I could escape this hell unharmed. Now I just want my story to serve as a warning. Be very careful with the people you trust, because as the saying goes, don't judge a book by its cover. Never ignore your intuition. If you are in a place and something inside tells you that you shouldn't be there, then run away. It could save your life. I'm going to tell you a story that sounds like it came out of a horror movie, and the craziest thing is it's completely true. Imagine the man you thought would never hurt you, the man you shared almost 10 years of your life with, becomes your worst nightmare. Sounds terrible, right? But the worst part is it happens more often than people think, and it happened to me too. Back then, the laws against stalking weren't what they are today. There weren't as many ways to get a restraining order against an ex-partner, and women's shelters weren't as easily accessible or as well-funded as they are now. It was a tough time to be a divorced woman, and if it weren't for my job in public service, I would probably have faced it all alone. In the state where I lived, stalking a government employee was considered a felony. So, in a way, I had state police officers as my bodyguards. They were great. They escorted me to my car and patrolled my office. But there was a problem. They couldn't follow me home, to where I was alone with my 2 small children who didn't understand why their father was so angry and where I was more vulnerable than anywhere else. It all started when my ex decided he wanted a divorce. We had already been living separately for a while, and when the papers arrived, I had already mentally detached myself from the relationship. It had been a dysfunctional, abusive marriage, and apart from my children, I had lost more than 9 years of my life to a narcissist who seemed to take pleasure in my suffering. He thought I would fight the divorce. I wouldn't be able to fight back and would somehow want him back. But no, I signed those papers without hesitation and sent them to court. Had he paid more attention to our lives before the separation, he would have seen that I had received 2 promotions in 6 months and was earning a few thousand more than he was. So I wanted neither alimony nor anything else. I just wanted him out of my life once and for all. But when he learned that I would not contest the divorce and would accept it without objection, chaos erupted. His attempt to manipulate me through the divorce failed, and because he could no longer control me, he went berserk. He called me 30 to 40 times a day and threatened me. He even called my work, and when I blocked his number, he started calling my superiors and making up lies about me to get me fired. Not only that, he harassed my colleagues and even came to my office to slash my car tires and scratch the paint. This psychopath called my family to threaten them and tried to turn my children against me by playing the victim every time he had custody. But it got worse and worse. He garnished my wages, claiming he was the custodial parent, a blatant lie. And without even asking me, they started deducting half of my salary as child support. So I had to take a day off, which I couldn't afford, and drive many miles to clear up the mess he had made. My ex-husband was determined to destroy me. He called my pastor to sob about me. He found heaps of lies and accused me of being unfaithful to him. He sought allies. He wanted to alienate me from everyone I loved, and for a while he succeeded. I felt humiliated, and for a while I couldn't sleep more than 3 or 4 hours a night. I was too stressed and constantly full of fear, always thinking about what his next step would be to destroy me. The last straw was when he broke into my house one night and held me captive for 6 hours, during which he abused me, beat me, and showered me with all kinds of insults and threats, while his own children cried in the next room. My face was so swollen that I barely recognized myself, and after he had beaten me almost to death, he fell asleep completely drunk in our bed. Only then did I find the strength to sneak out of bed and go downstairs to call the police. He only woke up when he saw an officer spray pepper spray in his face. And God, it was so satisfying to hear him scream. He was arrested that same day, and my face was photographed as evidence. And for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. He spent the night in jail but was released on bail a few days later. Fortunately, the police informed me, but I was tense because his car was at my house, which meant he had to come back. So I stayed awake all night, waiting for him to pick up the car. I didn't want to close my eyes, afraid of what he might do if he caught me unprepared. Finally, he arrived at 3 a.m. Instead of seeking a confrontation, he fled as if he wanted to get away quickly. His violent behavior seemed to subside, but the calls and threats continued for months, even with a restraining order. On the advice of my lawyer, I began recording the calls as the situation became increasingly tense and frightening. Every day was a struggle, and although there were moments of calm, the shadow of his return always loomed. The uncertainty kept me awake at night, always worried about when he would reappear. At this point, life had become a nightmare, but I knew I had to keep going for my children. Digital recorders are quite affordable today and as indispensable in such situations as pepper spray or a taser, but this was over 30 years ago. So I was all the more grateful that I had anything at all with which I could record everything. After a while, he started coming by my house more often. The situation became so frightening that I decided to move in with my mother. I was completely terrified and exhausted. But one evening, just as I was about to lock the front door, I saw his delivery van drive by. That was one of the few times I truly lost my composure. I felt emotionally and physically drained, so I called the police and reported, "My stalker is threatening my elderly mother." But as if by magic, he was gone shortly before the officers arrived, almost as if he had a police scanner in his car. That night, I went to a friend's house. Of course, I took my mother with me. I didn't want him to see my car in the driveway and come into the house to harm me. My mother was a frail, widowed, elderly woman, and the thought that he might attack her made me feel even more vulnerable. So I took her everywhere with me as long as I was there. One evening, I decided to go to an open-air concert with a friend. She insisted that I needed to relieve stress, and she was right. Besides, it was a family event, so I took my children with me. I thought if they were with me, they would be safe. But just as I started to relax, I looked up and saw his delivery van turn the corner. At that moment, I realized I didn't see my children anywhere. The panic was indescribable. I turned around and saw a group of children playing on the lawn nearby. My little son was there, but my 8-year-old daughter was nowhere to be seen. Filled with fear, I called her name at the top of my lungs as I ran to where the van was parked to make sure it wasn't my ex-husband. That's when I saw him, completely drunk. My daughter ran towards him when she heard his voice and was just about to climb into the passenger seat when I grabbed her. She had no idea how drunk he was, and that says a lot about how normal it was for her to see him with bloodshot eyes and slurred speech. I ran to the nearest payphone. This was long before cell phones, and called the police, screaming into the receiver that my ex-husband had just tried to kidnap his own children. Only when I looked around did I realize how loud I had been. Almost everyone at the concert was staring at me. After my call, the police issued a warrant for his delivery van, but my nerves were frayed, and that night was another one where I didn't sleep a wink. The next morning, my heroes from the state police called and informed me that the van was now at his house. I jumped into the car and drove the 60 miles in record time. When I arrived, they had surrounded his house, and an officer shouted through a megaphone. They knew he was inside because he had answered the phone. I had no idea what was going on, but when I asked, they identified themselves and only wanted to know if I had a weapon. I said I wasn't sure. We never had one when we were together, but a lot had changed since then. We waited about an hour, and no matter how many times the police called him, he didn't answer anymore. Finally, the front door opened, and several police officers shouted at him to raise his hands as he came out. He was hungover and uncooperative, and we all feared the situation could escalate violently, but thank God it didn't. Finally, they took him back to jail. After that, I drove home, emotionally drained and devastated. In the end, he accepted a deal and only received probation. However, I believe that this second encounter with the police shook him up. On the path he was on, it could only end in death or prison, and apparently, that finally made him realize that he needed help. After this incident, the harassment subsided, and I could finally find some peace. Moving with my children to another state helped greatly, and as far as I know, he hasn't tried to follow us. Instead, I learned through a mutual acquaintance that he had joined Alcoholics Anonymous and managed to get sober. It took a few years before he was allowed to have contact with our children again, and the visits took place under supervision. At some point, he started going to church, which brought about a noticeable change in his life and behavior. He remarried and had more children. But even though my children have contact with him and their half-siblings, I never wanted to see him again. I forgave him a long time ago, but I felt that seeing him again would mean reliving all the hell he put me through, and I didn't want that, even now that we are older. I'm sorry this story was so long. I just felt I had something important to share. I hope other women and girls can read this and learn from my experience and my mistakes so they don't have to go through the same thing. Today, there's enough information about abusive relationships and how to prevent them or get out of them. But it's never the same as hearing it from someone who has experienced it firsthand. We have to be very careful when we choose who we share our lives with. And at the first sign of abuse or violence, we must leave and seek help. Honestly, I wouldn't wish what I went through on my worst enemy. It began during a difficult time in my life when I was 11, right when my parents decided to separate. It wasn't an easy divorce, and emotions and changes swirled around us. My mother quickly had to move into a small house outside our school district, while my father kept the family home in the neighborhood. This is relevant because, while both my brothers decided to stay with my father, my cousin, who had lived with us almost his entire life, and I decided to move in with my mother. The problem was that my mother's new house, as I said, wasn't in the school district, which meant there were no buses that could take us to school. So the plan was for her to drive us to school in the mornings before work, and after school, we would then take the bus to my father's house and spend a few hours there until she finished work and picked us up. With that out of the way, let's get to what really matters. In our neighborhood, there was a nice group of kids we got along well with. We always hung out together and took the bus to school. And after school, we also met up and even tried to build huts in a place we called the Ivy Corner, a small patch of woods that could be entered through an opening at the end of a cul-de-sac. Later in the story, this place will become important. This was our daily routine, until one day a new family moved into the neighborhood, and with them, their son Ethan. Ethan had brown, somewhat longer hair. He was also a rather scrawny boy. We first met him on the school bus, and since we were curious, we immediately wanted to talk to him. At first, he gave us a strange feeling, but honestly, he then seemed like a perfectly normal kid, and he blended in pretty well with the other neighborhood kids. Gradually, it became common to see Joshua, Kelly, Drew, Evan, and Ethan together, either as a group or in different constellations. As we got to know him better, we learned that he had gone to our school before but had been expelled for throwing a school desk at a teacher, and that they had only allowed him back this year. At the time, we took it as a prank by a difficult child, but in hindsight, I know that should have been a big red flag. The truth is Ethan, Drew, and I became quite close. I would say closer than with the other boys. I considered him a friend and not just another neighborhood kid to play with, which is why we didn't immediately turn our backs on him after something happened later. I must say that I wasn't there when it happened, but I later learned about the incident from my friends. One day, Drew and I got on the bus, and I immediately noticed that Ethan wasn't there. We always sat together, so I assumed he was absent, and Drew sat in his usual spot next to me. That's when Kelly and Evan, who always sat near us, started talking about something that had happened at school, and Drew and I quickly chimed in to find out what it was about. It turned out that apparently not long after Drew and I left for my mother's, Ethan had invited Kelly, Evan, and Joshua to his house. I don't remember now what exactly preceded it or what exactly happened, but the fact is that this meeting ended with Ethan chasing Joshua all the way to his house, machete in hand, threatening to cut off his head. Joshua lived on the other side of the neighborhood, and when he finally arrived home, his mother, who heard the sound of his screams, which could be heard all down the street, decided to go out and see what was going on. However, when she went out to help her son, Ethan chased both of them into the house, machete in hand. But the most frightening thing about it was that, according to Joshua, he was laughing like a madman and had a completely insane look on his face as he threatened them with the machete, threatening to kill them, as if he enjoyed the terror he instilled in them. Finally, amidst the chaos, the neighbors called the police, but honestly, I don't know what happened after that, except that Ethan was absent from school for a few days, and when he returned, he acted as if nothing had happened. After this incident, the other children in the neighborhood began to distance themselves from him, especially Joshua, for obvious reasons, whom I never saw talking to or near Ethan again, and who could blame him. Nevertheless, despite what he had done, I felt a little sorry for Ethan, and my naivety made me believe it was just a prank that had gotten out of hand. But boy, how wrong I was. In hindsight, I truly believe that after this incident with Joshua and his mother, something in Ethan changed, as if something had been triggered in his mind. The fact is, I started talking to him again and remained his friend, despite the rejection of everyone else. However, it wasn't long before things spiraled out of control. Soon after, we were sitting on the bus as usual, and I was talking to Ethan as we always sat next to each other. Suddenly, he pulled a pencil out of his pocket and without warning tried to stab me with it. He didn't just try. He actually wounded me in the neck. Luckily, it was only a superficial wound, but it left me completely stunned. The craziest thing about it is that Ethan laughed about it as if it was the funniest thing in the world. I was very upset, but more than anything else, I was scared. I couldn't believe what he had just done. At that moment, I knew that he wasn't a real friend, but that in truth, he was dangerous. So I decided to change seats. When I got off the bus a few minutes later, I felt like I had to tell the driver what had happened. So I did, but I never should have. To this day, I believe that decision was the trigger for all the chaos that followed. After that, Ethan was suspended from the bus for a few days, and when he came back, they made him sit at the very front, far away from me. He knew it was me who had snitched on him, because every time I walked past him to get off the bus, he would look at me with an expression that I can only describe as pure evil. He cursed at me, called me a tattletale, and threatened to get me back. I was scared. I had never felt such fear. A few days later, all the kids in the neighborhood decided they wanted nothing more to do with Ethan and stopped talking to him. I wish I could say the same about myself, but despite everything that had happened, I was a very naive and foolish child. finally. Ethan sent me a message apologizing and asking if Drew and I wanted to hang out, and I don't know why, but we ended up agreeing. Ethan mentioned that he and some of the other kids were going to the Ivy Corner to build huts, and that's what finally convinced us because we thought the others would be there too, so we went to his house, which was just around the corner. When we arrived, we rang the doorbell, and he opened the door with a smile. Next to him were some tools. He picked them up and told us to follow him to Lanradara. The moment he opened the door, his demeanor gave me a bad feeling. But for some dumb reason, I still hoped that everything would be normal once we got there and saw the other kids, so we followed him. A little later, we reached the small opening of La Andrita and went inside. To get to the small pond, you had to go down a somewhat steep slope and through some bushes. And you can imagine my surprise when I realized that no one else was there. At that moment, I turned to Ethan, who just laughed. "They're probably running late," he said. "Let's get started." Both Drew and I were nervous, and I suppose Ethan sensed that. "Hey, let's look for some branches and logs to build huts," he said, pointing towards the pond. I nodded, and we walked in that direction. But about 10 or 15 seconds after I started walking, an overwhelming urge to turn around came over me, and for that I will never stop thanking God. Ethan stood there, walking towards the distracted Drew, and picked up a large stone. My heart almost stopped when I realized he was holding a sickle-shaped tool he had brought with him and slowly raising it, with the clear intention of attacking her. At that moment, I let out a warning cry to Drew, and she flinched. Ethan quickly lowered the sickle and stared at me in confusion. I ran towards them, pushed Ethan away, grabbed Drew's hand, and pulled her back onto the path with me. "What's wrong?" Drew yelled at me as we ran as if fleeing from the devil, Ethan just a few meters behind us, cursing at us. "Ethan wants to kill us. Just run and under no circumstances stop." So Drew and I ran through the forest, which felt like an eternity, until we reached the steep section and climbed it as fast as monkeys climb trees. When we were almost at the top, I looked back and saw Ethan with an expression I can only describe as that of a psychopath chasing us. I prayed that we wouldn't slip or fall, and thank God we didn't. Luckily, Ethan had trouble climbing up, and that gave us time to get away from him. Drew and I continued running until we were halfway down the road. Then we stopped and looked, but Ethan was nowhere to be seen. In fact, we didn't even see him leave. We returned home exhausted and in a panic. We decided not to tell our parents, but the next day we told some of the other kids what had happened. The strangest thing is that we never saw Ethan again, neither on the bus nor at school. Shortly after, his parents moved out of that house, and my father left the neighborhood a year later. My mother also found a new house in our school district, so we moved too. This was over 15 years ago, and recently. I remembered the incident again and looked for Ethan online to see what had become of him. But I found nothing, no Facebook, no Instagram, nothing, as if he had simply disappeared, as if he had never existed. But I know that, unfortunately, he did exist. I no longer live nearby, thank God. I don't know where Ethan is or what happened to him, but as long as I don't encounter him again, everything is fine.